Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum, Salamat Datan, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all of you, wherever you are, from about 22 countries who are with us today. My name is Dr. Atif Abdelmageed, the CEO of ARTDO International. On behalf of Chairman Emeritus, Secretary General, President, Immediate Past-President, and all dignitary board members of ARTDO International, very glad to welcome all ARTDO International members and especially invited guests who joined us today to attend this special webinar with very unique partner, the National Certification Council for Activity Professionals from Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, God created human being with great gifts, the brain, which differentiates us from other creatures. Many people reach up to their 90s, and some reach more than that, like Jean-Louis Calment, who lived 120 years and 164 days, and her brain was sharp till she gone home. Imagine, in our language, Arabic, one of the meaning of insan, which is a human being, is a person who forget. And the first person who forget is our father Adam, who ate from that apple. ولقد عهدنا إلى آدم من قبل فنسي ولم نجد له عزما. Sometimes forgiveness is healthy. We need to forget our pain and our sorrows that may accumulate till depression and even lead to committing suicide. Currently, more than 55 million people live with dementia worldwide, and there are nearly 10 million new cases every year. The number is expected to rise to 78 million in 2030 and to 139 million in 2050. So, this is why WHO recognized dementia as a public health priority. And in May 2017, the World Health Assembly endorsed the Global Action Plan on the public health response to dementia for the period 2017 up to 2025. So still we are in, let us join. Today, we will hear from expert professionals about dementia, which is a wide umbrella resulting from a variety of diseases and injuries that primarily or secondary affect the brain and lead to deterioration in cognitive function beyond what might be expected from usual consequences of biological aging. The brain cell may be damaged or altered in one way or other, such as in Alzheimer's, Huntington's, Lewy body, Binswanger's, hip disease, and so on, so they cannot function, or the brain cell may be dying due to poor circulation or deficiency of some other substances and micronutrients or diseases. Dear friends, we know that when the brain cells are damaged, they will not function again. So my questions, does this mean we should forget about people with irreversible form of dementia? No, not at all. Rather, it means we need to provide opportunities for them to continue using their strengths that remain and minimize the negative impact of losses. So we are here in this webinar to know and see the big picture of what we should have to do to our beloved people. Apologize, my friend, for forgetting the mic on my hand, and now it is time to handle it to the right person. He's a reputable close friends and colleagues. He's a life member of ARTDO International and also he is the leader of ARTDO US as well as the CEO of National Certification Council for Activity Professional in United States of America, Washington, D.C. Our brother, Senior Peter Illig. Brother Peter, kindly moderate and facilitate this webinar with your outstanding professional speaker. Peter, the stage for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Shukran. Shukran. Salam alaikum. Welcome. It's wonderful to see so many friends, familiar faces. I remember many of you, even though it's been a couple of years due to COVID that we haven't been able to see each other in person. So I look forward to, I'm very excited to see many of you this October at the ARTDO International Conference. So thank you for that wonderful introduction, Dr. Atif. This webinar represents the first initiative of ICAP, the International Certification Council of Activity Professionals, which is the global initiative of NCCAP, the National Certification Council, which together with ARTDO US is holding this webinar as the launch of a new initiative to bring education, training, and certification into the ARTDO network as an opportunity. This opportunity is intended to address the important subject of caring for our elders in our home countries, in our home communities, and in our families. And the opportunity through ICAP and ARTDO US is for all of us to deliver education and training to better engage, understand, communicate, and interact with an older person who may be experiencing any variety of mental or physical conditions associated with aging, like dementia, which is what we'll learn about today. So today you'll be hearing from Dr. Rob Winningham, Dr. Paul Benheim, and certified therapeutic recreation therapist Debbie Hommel, all who have unique and recognized expertise on the important topic, understanding dementia. We just heard some context set by Dr. Atif, and we know that the World Health Organization, among those details we heard Dr. Atif say, tells us that dementia is the 7th leading cause of death and a major cause of disability and dependency among older people. Dementia has physical, psychological, social, economic impacts, not only for the person living with dementia, but also for those who care for them, especially the family members. There is often a lack of awareness and understanding of dementia, which acts as a barrier to diagnoses, treatment, and care. So there's only 2 significant trends that I want to emphasize before we turn it over to our experts. The first significant trend is that the world is getting older. Every country has an older population that is growing in number and increasing in proportion to the total population. By 2030, 1 out of every 6 persons will be 60 years or older, and that's close to 1.4 billion. By 2050, this will nearly double to 2.1 billion people over the age of 60. The other trend that is significant is that, unfortunately, the world, in many respects, is getting less healthy. While we have advances in healthcare and medicine, allowing us to live longer, there are unfortunate trends like smoking, obesity, high blood sugar, and lack of physical activity, which all have been associated with increased occurrence of dementia. So again, NCCAP through ICAP, the International Certification Council, and ARTDO US, we are committed to bringing expert resources, like our speakers today, into the ARTDO network for the opportunity to address this urgent, critical, and growing need to care for our elders. So now it is with great pleasure that I introduce our first speaker, Dr. Rob Winningham. Dr. Winningham is a PhD neuroscientist who is the provost and vice president for academic affairs at Western Oregon University. At Western Oregon University, he previously served as professor of psychology and gerontology and actually established the gerontology department. He also served as the dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. Focused on memory and aging, he has trained thousands of professionals in cognitive rehabilitation and therapy programs. And he's published many peer-reviewed articles in the area of human memory and aging. Dr. Winningham is the author of Train Your Brain, How to Maximize Memory Ability in Older Adulthood, and also Cranium Crunches, both of which can be found on Amazon. Welcome, Dr. Winningham.
Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Dr. Adi, and thank you all for being here. This is quite an honor to be speaking with all of you here today. I'm going to share my screen now. In listening to some of the comments and context this morning, there's a lot of interest in what we can do to prevent dementia. I think that is one of our goals. We also want to try to delay dementia or delay the symptoms. In some cases, try to improve cognitive impairment. There does come a point where that is difficult to do. Somewhere between early to mid-stage dementia, we have a point of diminishing returns for some of the interventions that work for mild cognitive impairment and early stage dementia. The other goal, and I heard this a lot in the opening comments, is we want to maximize quality of life. And when we get, particularly when we get beyond early stage dementia, but even there, but certainly mid-stage dementia, late-stage dementia, our goals really shift to maximizing quality of life. And the comments about working with people with dementia and communication are very important, and I'll have a few comments about that. I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on the physiology of dementia, but I'm a neuropsychologist, and I almost can't separate the brain from cognition and behavior. They're one and the same to me in how I think about dementia. And I'm not going to be focusing on this. Dr. Bendheim and Debbie will be talking more about these sorts of things. But if you want to summarize in 30 seconds the research on prevention and delay of dementia, it would include physical exercise. Hundreds of studies have shown physical exercise can delay dementia and even reverse some of the impairments in early stage dementia if done correctly. The research shows we ideally want to have strength training and aerobic training. And so that seems to be the most effective. There's a body of literature on cognitive stimulation that can help, meditation, yoga, social interactions, maximizing sleep quality, avoiding or managing the symptoms of diabetes, and listening to the introductions, I thought I would mention, research has shown that bilingualism and multilingualism can delay dementia. And two studies actually landed very close to similar estimates. It looks like being bilingual could delay dementia by 4.5 years. And delaying dementia that long is significant, because if you delay dementia long enough, many people aren't going to get it because it's such a late life disease. So some broader comments there before I get into the work, this presentation. So understanding dementia, I get a question asked a lot, and that question is, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? And so think about that. How would you answer that question? Well, I would answer that question by pointing out that dementia is a global category of disorders that includes many different types. Alzheimer's is probably the most common, followed by vascular dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, Pick's dementias, and others. And of course, dementia negatively affects people's ability to perform everyday activities that can lead to a lack of independence. So I view dementia, and I even think I heard this word earlier, as an umbrella category. And there's many different types of dementia underneath that umbrella, as I mentioned. Don't read too much into these numbers here, because I'm not sure any of us know the proportion of different types of dementias. I spent years trying to figure this out. I really gave it a good effort to try to figure out the different proportions of the different types of dementia. But one of the reasons is that is a fool's errand, is because increasingly we believe that many people have more than one underlying cause for their cognitive impairment. Probably the most common secondary dementia that is going on is vascular dementia. And a leading researcher in the US has estimated that could be as many as 50% of all dementia cases have a vascular component caused by a stroke or other ischemic event. The other thing I would like to point out, just to maximize our care of those that we work with, is be mindful of the difference between dementia and delirium. Delirium refers to an acute physiological brain dysfunction that usually developed over a relatively quick period of time. So probably the most common cause of delirium, which looks a lot like dementia, but is treatable, are infections, urinary tract infections, for example. Medication can do this. Post-operative side effects, particularly those that related to anesthesia, metabolism issues, food intake. In some parts of the world, dehydration can actually be the leading cause of delirium, and followed by infections, but usually infections is the most common. So if somebody has developed what looks like dementia very quickly, it probably is either delirium and can be treated if it's one of these, or they've had a stroke. And there could be some other signs that has happened. So dementia, obviously we have deficits in memory, but we also need to be looking for deficits in communication and language and giving people the tools to continue to communicate. We see deficits in reasoning and problem solving. Those are some of the criteria that we look at when we're looking at diagnoses. Some initial signs of dementia might include challenges with finances. We see this a lot. It's one of the real bellwether symptoms. So balancing a checkbook, not being able to pay their bills, getting lost in familiar places, or keeping track of appointments. To some degree, I mean, if you make one of these mistakes, you don't want to become concerned. We all have made mistakes before, but these are some of the signs that first appear. So a little bit about the different types, most common types of dementia. Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is a very long course. It could take 20 years between the first time that somebody is suspicious that dementia might be at play and death. Young onset dementia, defined as dementia before the age of 65, appears to have a higher heritability rate than late onset dementia. It's more likely to run in families. Young onset dementia is much more genetic. They might have more genes that produce an amyloid protein, for example, that's been associated with increased dementia. Late onset dementia might be more environmental. The researchers argue a lot about what proportion of your chance of getting dementia is environmental and how you have lived your life versus what percent is genetic. A good estimate might be 50-50, but there might be some differences with the different types of dementia, even young onset versus late onset. We need to be mindful of vascular dementia. Vascular dementia leads to brain damage, and the symptomology of vascular dementia is incredibly varied because we don't know what part of the brain is going to be damaged. And neuropsychological testing can help us identify the lost abilities and then give us an idea for what part of the brains has been damaged. If you damage just a small part of your brain and you had a neuropsych test, we could give you another neuropsych test and do a pretty good job of telling you what cognitive ability has been lost and where that is. We often look at left hemisphere, right hemisphere brain differences. For most people, for example, we see left hemispheres associated with language. So yesterday, my children were at swim practice or on swim team, and so I was sitting in the hot tub while my children were there, and somebody came into the hot tub that recently had a stroke, and it was quite obvious. And I saw her.
Rob, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Rob, you became muted. Unmute yourself, Rob. I'm sorry.
Okay. So thank you. So we really need to pay attention to is a left hemisphere, right hemisphere difference. So if we see deficits on the right side of the body, that's an indication that the left hemisphere has been damaged, and that would probably be associated, very likely associated with language impairment if it's damaged to the left side. So kind of looking at some of the physiology of dementia, a lot of it comes down to neurotransmitter activity. And so these are neurons. We have, we estimate 86 billion neurons in our brain, and the electricity travels down one neuron, then neurotransmitters are released, and then that can get picked up by the second neuron. So this is the first neuron here, if we blow this up, and this is the second neuron. And the neurotransmitters, that's this little ball here, that is incredibly important for memory, is called acetylcholine. So acetylcholine allows us to make new memories and work through the memory centers. The problem is we don't have enough acetylcholine in many cases when people have cognitive impairment. And so one of the things that the body is trying to do, it's constantly trying to eat up metabolized neurotransmitters that have been previously released. So when the neuron fires, acetylcholine has been released, enzymes come up and eat up the metabolized the acetylcholine, so new transmitter activity can mean something. So the drug like Aricept, what it does is it stops the enzymes from metabolizing acetylcholine. So you have more acetylcholine to find a receptor site and make the second neuron work. So that's some of the really basic neurophysiology of dementia and how drugs like Aricept, which are also known as acetylcholine esterase inhibitors. So these acetylcholine enzyme, metabolizing enzyme inhibitors. So that's how that works. Another aspect of aging and sometimes dementia is that the myelin gets thinner. So here's our neuron again. And when a neuron fires, an action potential, a little bit of electrical energy goes down this axon and makes the next neuron fire through acetylcholine, for example. Now, one of the things that we have on this axon is fat. It's called myelin. And the neat thing about myelin is the thicker your myelin is on an axon, the faster the signal travels, up to 270 miles per hour. 270, I probably should calculate that, change that to kilometers, so over 300 kilometers per hour is how fast that is traveling. The problem is during normal aging, our myelin actually gets thinner. It's called demyelination, and it's a fairly normal process. But if it gets too thin, and that will affect your speed of processing. That can affect how quick you can think. It also can affect how quickly you can respond to a change in the environment that might lead to a fall. Diseases such as multiple sclerosis, the body attacks the myelin, and that can lead to cognitive impairment and other types of impairment. We can also see brain volume decreases with dementia. So on the left, you see a healthy brain. On the right, you see a brain with fairly advanced Alzheimer's. When you get to this stage of dementia, you're probably going back in time. You don't remember what happened 10 years ago. You don't remember what happened 20 years ago, and you go further and further back in time. It's often called retrogenesis, retro to go back, genesis to the beginning. But this cortical volume loss is associated in part with neuronal death, but also in part from demyelination, which can lead to obviously lots of cognitive and physical problems. The other thing I would point out is this is the front of the brain of a psychopath, somebody who is diagnosed with psychopathology or antisocial personality disorder. The frontal lobe of the brain is probably what makes us most human. It's the last to develop in children, actually young adults. It's probably the last to have developed in our evolution. And executive functioning resides in the frontal lobe. Executive functioning includes things such as attention, inhibition, and problem solving. And we see here, this person is a psychopath, and they're not able to inhibit impulses. And that can lead to some serious problems. And unfortunately, maybe 1 in 200, 1 in 300 people have this problem to this degree. This can, however, happen if you have a frontal lobe brain injury. People who have had damage to their frontal lobe, they can look very much like they have antisocial personality disorder. Unfortunately, some of these brain pathophysiologies happen with dementia as well. And so you'll see this uninhibited behavior often have a very difficult time inhibiting behavior. And of course, inhibition means to not do something. And that could include not doing a physical behavior, but also not doing a cognitive behavior. And you'll see people when they have damage to the frontal lobe, they often perseverate or they get stuck on an emotion. Maybe it's anger, maybe it's fear, and they just can't inhibit that anger or fear. And that can be a real challenge. And that also can affect attention. And when we get to this stage of dementia or we have a brain injury like this, we see some common unwanted behaviors, such as getting stuck on an emotion or a thought. Or we'll see sexually or socially inappropriate behavior. And they just have a very difficult time inhibiting that. In care settings, we often see spitting or hitting. In congregate care settings, we'll see people just walk into other people's rooms, in an inappropriate manner. They can't inhibit, or they will scream. So these sorts of unwanted behaviors can be really challenging for loved ones and caregivers to deal with. But at some point, it is to be expected, particularly with mid to late stage dementia. It's often associated with that emotional perseveration, and it can lead to aggression and inappropriate verbal behavior. And for many people, if they're in a congregate care setting, which has some advantages, if this isn't under control, they can't stay in that setting. They're going to need to go to a higher level of care, and that can reduce quality of life. These unwanted behaviors related to damage to the frontal lobe, it's also called the prefrontal cortices, often looks like a child's behavior. This can lead to a lack of empathy. They don't understand how their behavior is hurting others. They have a lack of awareness. They often don't see how their behavior is going to impact others emotionally. So many times, people will say things that are hurtful and they can't see that, just like a 3-year-old child would. I remember once when my son was young. He was about 3. We were playing on his floor. He was laughing. And my wife came in and said, "What are you doing?" She wanted to play. It's fun to play with laughing 3-year-olds. And she came in and he said, "Go away, Mom. I don't want you. I want Dad." And like, don't say that to your mom, right? But we know that's a normal behavior for a 3-year-old, right? But that's harder to accept that as a normal behavior when it's your mother, when it's your father, when it's your spouse. But from a brain standpoint, it's actually quite explainable why this is happening. So a little bit about how to maximize quality of life. So the physical exercise, I just cannot stress how important this is. This by far has been the area where there's the greatest amount of research showing that physical exercise can lead to actually improvements in executive functioning, particularly for people who have mild cognitive impairment. This is just one step away from being diagnosed with dementia. And about 20% of people in every year who have mild cognitive impairment will go on to develop dementia, okay? So fairly high transition rate. At the mild cognitive impairment stage, we can actually improve executive functioning with strength training and aerobic training. So lifting weights, it's also called resistance training, has been shown to be very effective. And the benefits from strength training are independent from the benefits from aerobic training. It's important to keep in mind. The physical exercise interventions have also been shown to improve physical mobility and reduce the cost and level of care for people with more advanced dementia. So let's say we're looking at mid to late stage dementia. A physical exercise intervention, one study published in the Journal of American Medical Association, found that it saved thousands of dollars a year in care if we just went into people's rooms once or twice a week and said, hey, would you like to exercise with me? They could say no, but many of them did exercise, and that led to greater independence because they were able to get to the bathroom by themselves, for example. They were able to do some things that made them more independent, reduce the cost of care, but improve their dignity and independence. When we see the unwanted behaviors, we need some tools to help people who are caregivers. Redirecting is probably the most effective way to stop unwanted behaviors. And some of the things that we have seen to be quite effective are old photographs. Now, when somebody has mid to late stage dementia, you need to know where in time they are, because it's common that you go back in time. So we will see people with mid to later stages of dementia who think that, that it's the year 2000. They'll think it's the 1990s or the 1980s. They're going back in time, and they can move through time, but we often try to go to the time where they're at. Okay, I worked with one company where we had a software solution. You actually typed in the year. They're living in 1980. So we had catalogs from 1980. We had magazine covers. We had movies from 1980. We had things that they would have experienced in 1980 that will grab their attention. If you put the TV news on in 2022 for somebody who's living in 1980, you are going to make them more confused. You are going to make them more agitated. So go to their time. So if we can have old photographs from the past and they're having an emotional challenge, they're perseverating, we come in and say, who is that in that old photograph? Maybe it's an old, maybe it's a family photo from the past. They will look at that and they will forget what they were perseverating on. They will forget, they will stop the behavior that they were doing. Music is another effective way to do that. Music therapy has actually been shown to decrease the need for drugs to control behavior, for pharmaceutical interventions. Just listening to music. And the music that was most effective? The music from their teenage years. That was the music that improved their behavior the best. So what music would that be for you? The music that you were listening to in your teenage years. That could be the music that would be most effective in controlling unwanted behaviors. Videos can also be very effective now, right? We have a new tool, so we can get some old videos from the past that they know. We also want to try to give them things to do. Even something like folding laundry can help them take their mind off of other things. It gives them a sense of purpose. So it's a purposeful behavior, and there's a lot to be said for that. It's all about the here and now. When you're working with somebody with mid to late stage dementia, we're in the moment. If they think it's 1980, fine, it's 1980, because it's 1980 for them. It doesn't matter if it's 2022. Reality, to some extent at this point, doesn't matter. Don't argue with them. Don't try to show them a newspaper or some proof that it's really 2022. It's not going to work. It actually could make it worse. And doing that sort of thing is no longer recommended. We try not to argue. We try not to escalate. And many people that are good at working with people with mid to late stage dementia understand that it's okay to deceive. If they are waiting for their spouse to come home from work, but their spouse died years ago, we don't tell them their spouse is dead. We say, okay, well, would you like to get some dinner while we wait? We just roll with it. And doing that can really maximize quality of life. And one other suggestion is sequencing. This is very effective. This is something that physical therapists will often work with people with dementia on. We can teach people a sequence, even if they have no memory of learning that sequence, or they can't tell you what the sequence is. So a structure of the day. We do this in more intensive memory care communities, where if we always go from breakfast to activity room to physical exercise, back to our room to take a rest, it's always in that order. You know what will happen? You ask somebody after breakfast, what do you do after breakfast? They'll say, I don't know. But you know what they're going to do? They're going to walk up and go to the activity room, because that's what they do after breakfast every day. Even though they cognitively can't tell you what's next, they do what is next. And so we can help people, use something like a coffee maker or a remote control or folding laundry. They can learn a sequence of simple behavior if they do it enough times. Now, they have to do it a lot, 50 to 100 times. But if we do something the same 50 to 100 times, the person, even with fairly advanced dementia, can learn that sequence, even though they can't ever cognitively talk about it. So just there's some structures of the brain with most types of dementias that stay intact and allow us to do that. So my suggestions are: be proactive. If you're concerned about someone or yourself, it's important to be getting some of those lifestyle changes: the strength training, aerobic training, yoga, meditation, cognitive stimulation, social interactions, learn a second language or a third language. We can do those things proactively. But the other thing that is important is to get baseline testing, and I cannot stress this enough. If we are concerned that dementia might be occurring in somebody, we need to get some baseline neuropsych testing, because that will allow us to look again in a year or two and to see how things have changed. And from a diagnostic standpoint, if we can see changes from a baseline in different areas, that can help us figure out what type of dementia it is, because there's many types of dementia, and knowing the type of dementia can be helpful in treating it and maximizing quality of life. But it's very difficult for us to do that in some cases if we don't have a baseline, something to compare future tests to. It's often helpful to find a geriatric specialist if you can. People who specialize working with older adults often have some greater expertise in this area. And there's some wonderful resources. The Alzheimer's Association, the Family Caregiving Alliance has some wonderful resources that can be used there. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Winningham. That was an excellent introduction, and I think many of the points resonated with us on the personal level, as well as what we may be experiencing with others. So thank you. Moving things along, it's my opportunity or my honor to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Paul Benheim. Dr. Bendheim is a medical doctor and clinical professor of neurology at the University of Arizona College of Medicine in Phoenix, Arizona. Dr. Bendheim is a board-certified neurologist and an authority on Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. He's a member of the Scientific Advisory Board of the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation. He's lectured around the world, published numerous scientific research articles, and is the author of the book, The Brain Training Revolution, a proven workout for healthy brain aging, which is available on Amazon. Dr. Bendheim is also the founder and CEO of Brain Savers, a US company that offers a brain and body fitness program and which partners with NCCAP for the delivery of this brain and fitness program. So welcome, Dr. Bendheim.
Am I unmuted, Peter?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank the officers of ARTDO for organizing this in collaboration with Peter and his organization. And I want to thank all of you for attending. And I especially want to thank Dr. Winningham for his presentation that I think is a complement to what I'm going to talk about. Dr. Winningham spoke eloquently about what you can do to help people who are already suffering from cognitive impairment and dementia. My major focus is on prevention. So, and I apologize, both Rob and I are fascinated by the brain. It's an endlessly expanding universe, and it's impossible in 20 minutes or even 2 hours to begin to cover the subject, but let's go. So as Peter said, I'm affiliated with the College of Medicine in Phoenix. And I tell the students there, they are arguably in the most beautiful medical school building in the country, maybe in the world. It's all copper and glass. And it's an honor to be able to educate them. And so I always note that I have an equity position in the company that I founded. And as Rob and others have said, a top concern, as Dr. Atif said, we're getting older, and at least in our country, the United States, since President Reagan went public with his diagnosis of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, now we talk about this openly, and it has risen, if not to the top spot, the second highest spot when surveys are done about the concerns of aging Americans. Here are some demographics that will repeat some of the things that have already been said, but not only in the United States, but worldwide, in 2019, for the first time, there were more people over 65 than under 5 years of age, and that trend is continuing worldwide. 34% of the world's population is over 50. There are almost 1 billion older adults age 60, and by 2050, that number is going to grow to 2.1 billion. 66%, fully 2/3 of Alzheimer's victims are women, and 1 in 3 seniors in the United States, and I think that number holds up worldwide, will die from Alzheimer's or another dementia. And here are some statistics from the World Health Organization and the Alzheimer's Disease International Organization. Every 3 seconds, someone in the world develops dementia. So in the hour that we're together, or the hour and a half, at least 180 to 270 people will be developing dementia. There are 55 million currently, as Dr. Atif said. By 2050, there will be almost 140 million victims of dementia worldwide. And the cost is astronomical. In the United States, if you take 2 individuals that are of equal age, let's say 80 years old, and they both have diabetes, they both have some arthritic conditions, but one has dementia and the other does not, the individual with dementia will cost the healthcare system 3 times as much. There are some medical economists in the United States who predict this one disease, Alzheimer's disease, could bankrupt our healthcare system. And you can see why. By 2030, the cost is estimated to rise to $2.8 trillion. That's worldwide. In the US, in US dollars. Currently, it's at 1.3 trillion worldwide. So this is an enormous problem worldwide because we have an aging population, but it's also an opportunity. And that opportunity has become increasingly apparent over the last 25 years based on research done by colleagues of Dr. Winningham and myself worldwide neuroscientists, neurologists, neuropsychologists, gerontologists, exercise physiologists, it goes on, have furthered our understanding of the aging brain. When I was a medical student, I was privileged to study under Dr. Houston Merritt at Columbia University in New York City. He's arguably the most famous man and the famous physician in the history of neurologist in the history of this country. And he said to us one day, to the students, something that so impacted me that it's in my book. He said, the worst thing about growing old is listening to my brain cells commit suicide. That was the central dogma of the aging brain. You were born with this unbelievably marvelous organ, the human brain, but at the age of 40, it started to unravel. And if you were lucky, it unraveled slowly, and you lived to a ripe old age, cognitively, intellectually, mentally intact. If you were unlucky, it unraveled more quickly and you became demented. Well, we now know, based on all this research, that's not true. You can develop a stronger brain as you age. The greatest risk factors are advancing age and unhealthy lifestyle practices. We can't stop the clock, but we can change our lifestyle. And I'm not going to repeat the others. You've heard the other statistics here below before. But you can, I will say, in the United States, heart disease deaths are down more than 7% since 2000, whereas Alzheimer's disease deaths are up almost 150%. Now, what are the treatments? Dr. Winningham spoke eloquently about behavioral treatments that are critical because we really have no other treatments for patients with dementia that change the course of the disease. So I've listed on the left what I call symptomatic treatments, the cholinesterase inhibitors that Dr. Winningham mentioned, such as Aricept, and there are a bunch of others, including combination therapies. And then we have all the behavioral, psychiatric, psychological interventions, antipsychotics, anxiolytics, antidepressants, sleep medications, and then importantly, the non-pharmacological behavioral interventions that can improve the quality of life. Unfortunately, none of these change significantly the disease progression. Now, for the first time ever, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in this country, approved a disease-modifying therapy. Unfortunately, it's beyond affordability for most people, and perhaps more importantly, the consensus among Alzheimer's experts is that the trials that led to the approval didn't demonstrably demonstrate efficacy. Nevertheless, it is available. It's a monoclonal antibody given by injection. And in development are, because of this enormous problem, are at least 126 different pharmaceuticals or biologicals. And just to show you the enormity of this program, I don't expect you can read this, but you can see each of those colored triangles or circles is another drug in development. Some are disease modifying, some are symptomatic. This is a field that's in desperate need of interventions to slow progression or halt the progression. Now, from the World Health Organization 10 years ago, they concluded that at least 1/3 of all dementia cases are attributable to modifiable risk factors. What that means is we can eliminate a significant number of dementia cases worldwide by changing risk factors. And Dr. Winningham mentioned diabetes, hypertension, stroke risk factors. This is my passion. I realized more than 10 years ago when I was reviewing a grant for a scientific advisory board that I serve on, that what I had been taught by Dr. Merritt and others had been demonstrated not to be true. That in fact, if you involve yourself in a brain healthy lifestyle, those brain cells don't have to commit suicide. In fact, you can generate new brain cells and connect them through synapses, which again, Dr. Winningham demonstrated in his slides how two neurons connect through their axons and dendrites and communicate with each other. So, and as Peter graciously said, I wrote this book. That was the start of my mission to help educate the world on what they can do now to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease. And you see the seahorse on top of the brain. Why is that there? There's a structure in your brain on each side in the temporal lobes here above and behind the ears that's called the hippocampus, which means seahorse in Greek. And it's called that because when you cut the brain in a certain way, you see this structure that looks like a seahorse. And as far as memory is concerned, it is the most critical part of your brain. It's responsible for forming short-term memories and then eventually kicking them upstairs to the cortex to become permanent memories. Why do individuals classically who are developing Alzheimer's disease have short-term memory problems, forgetting that they just eaten lunch an hour ago, forgetting the names of friends and family, because the hippocampus is damaged. So two fundamental principles underlying what I call the new science of the aging brain. Brain plasticity. You can change the shape of your brain. You can generate new brain cells in the hippocampus and perhaps in other areas, and you connect them through synapses, the intersections between brain cells. And then the other critical principle is brain reserve or cognitive reserve. Everyone understands now physical reserve. People that do a modest amount of exercise, eat a healthy diet, manage stress, they have physical reserve. So if they would unfortunately get COVID, their chances of recovering more quickly are greatly enhanced. If they have to have surgery, if you have physical reserve, you recover more quickly, and it protects you to a certain extent against age-related heart disease, stroke, osteoporosis, and others. Brain reserve is the equivalent principle applied to the brain. So this icon shows the 6 components that we've incorporated in our Brain Plus Body Total Evidence-based program at Brain Savers. And importantly, if you live a brain healthy lifestyle, you reduce your risk of age-related cognitive impairment, decline, including age-associated memory impairment. You reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease, and critically important for a society, we can greatly reduce healthcare costs by keeping people free from cognitive impairment and dementia. So I want to quickly run through the 6 components. In the time, there's not enough time to go into detail here, but first of all, exercise your brain. I talk about the 20 muscles inside your skull, inside your head, because people understand exercising muscles makes them stronger. So now this is almost 20 years ago, Dr. Joe Coyle, a neurologist at Harvard, wrote this editorial, "Do effortful mental activities protect against dementia?" Just 2 years later, 2 psychologists in Australia looked at all the evidence, and they concluded that there's robust evidence that exercising your brain, even in the late life stages, is associated with reduced risk of dementia. And since then, there's literally been hundreds of additional papers further documenting that keeping your brain active, even if you're retired, is critical to volunteer, to join book clubs, whatever it is to challenge your brain on a daily basis. At Brain Savers, we talk about the World Brain Gym. Every community has limitless intellectually stimulating activities, whether they're adult education. It's important for each of us to take advantage of those opportunities. Again, Dr. Winningham talked about the critical importance of exercise. Physical exercise, mainly aerobics, but also, as he said, strength training and balance and flexibility are important as part of a complete exercise program to reduce the risk of falls. Anyway, aerobic exercise has shown to increase the volume of the hippocampus, the seahorse, by generating new neurons there. Diet. This is the best studied diet, the so-called Mediterranean diet. And you can see this pyramid, what makes up the majority, the base of the Mediterranean diet: whole grains, fresh fruits and vegetables, nuts, seeds, olive oil, less fatty meats, more fish, poultry. And the evidence is overwhelming. If you even modestly adhere to this type of nutrition, you reduce your risk significantly. If you adhere more closely, you reduce your risk by 40%. Some studies say more than 40%. So the bottom line is nutritional modification intervention can significantly reduce cognitive decline and the risk of all-cause dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Socialization, staying or becoming more engaged with family and friends is a great brain booster. And these are two studies now from 15 years ago, and these are direct quotes, that being socially engaged provides evidence that it delays memory loss among aging Americans. And it's actually possible to reset a downhill trajectory in cognitive ability by getting and staying socially involved. You can improve your brain's function by interacting with other people. Stress. Now, stress is built into our brain, but it's built in, handling stress is built into as a short-term stressor. So if a fire alarm goes off, we get out of the building. That's a stressor that only lasts for a moment or two. What's not built into our brain is the ability to handle the chronic stresses of modern life: divorces, drug and alcohol problems, financial issues that we saw, unfortunately, in a large way 10 years ago, about 12 years ago, with the housing crisis in this country. Chronic stress is a brain wrecker. The best studied is depression. And people with chronic depression, in some cases, can be mistaken for having Alzheimer's disease or dementia because their hippocampi shrink. With treatment of the depression, the hippocampi can regenerate. And finally, sleep. It's increasingly apparent that people with chronic sleep issues have memory issues, additional cognitive impairment, and impaired sleep on a chronic basis is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. It's during sleep when the hippocampus, the seahorse in your brain, acts as a film director and reviews the days, previous days, up to several weeks films, and decides which sections, which frames should be made into permanent memories. And Shakespeare realized this, that his brain is working even while he's sleeping. That's one of his sonnets there. So don't take my word for this. In 2015, a major study was published in The Lancet, the leading British medical journal. It's called the Finger Study. It was done in Scandinavia, and it demonstrated over 2 years that people in a multi-component, a multimodal program that involved nutritional interventions, physical and cognitive exercise, and an active social life performed better than the control group that just got general medical advice. This was such an important study that Scientific American made it its cover 2 years later. And now even the Harvard Guide to Cognitive Fitness duplicates the 6 components of Brain Savers in their Guide to Cognitive Fitness. So this is now mainstream. The realization among the neurological, neuropsychological, and other communities is that lifestyle can make a huge difference in how our brains age. This is a quote from the National Alzheimer's Association in this country, that if you make brain healthy lifestyle changes, we could realize a future without Alzheimer's disease. That's a bit extravagant. I think that we can maybe reduce the incidence by at least 30%, perhaps as high as 50% through lifestyle. So quickly, this is the Brain Savers Brain Plus Body Total Lifestyle Program. We have more than 2 years, we have 3 years of content, Groups meet usually twice a week for an hour. And you can see on the left, they start with some socialization, meditation, deep breathing, relaxation. And then they do thinking and moving exercises. Dance is the best example. Learning a new dance forces your brain to work and your body to move. We then have the formal exercise component, which usually lasts about 20 minutes. It includes those 4 components. The deep dive is an in-depth 15-minute or so lecture by the instructor on one of the 6 components, whether it's nutrition, physical exercise, cognitive exercise. That's followed by formal brain exercises. And then finally, some more socialization, Q&A, and encouragement of participants to get out there in the World Brain Gym, get out in your community and partake of all the opportunities to move your body and strengthen your brain. So here's a picture of a class in session, and Janet, the instructor in the yellow shirt, believe it or not, is a 78-year-old woman when this photo was taken. And prior to COVID, we started working on expanding the scalability of this to what we call now BrainSaver Synapse. And that's the complete program offered through a series of videos. So this can be done individually at home. And I want to just acknowledge one of our partners, and that's the WellMed Charitable Foundation. And I would encourage all of you to get in touch with Carol Zerniel, the executive director, or Tina Smith, the director of caregiver program. They have just launched a brain health initiative, which across their entire population of more than 600,000 members. And that's to measure someone's cognitive ability every year. If they have no evidence of cognitive impairment, they're referred to a senior activity center where BrainSavers is offered. If they show signs of cognitive impairment, then they're referred to their care team, which then does the kind of evaluation that Dr. Winningham said is critical to understanding exactly what's going on and provide the appropriate interventions. My prediction is that this model of a brain health initiative at the WellMed Foundation in Texas is going to be increasingly adopted across this country and hopefully the world to make a positive impact in this devastating disease, which is now a tsunami because of the aging population. And here's my contact information. Please feel free to contact me by email, by phone, if I can help in any way. And with that, I'll apologize if I've gone too long. And I thank Peter and the directors of ARTDO for asking me to do this. It's been a great honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bendheim. Very informative, very hopeful. Thank you for sharing those things. And there's a lot, you can see there's a lot that we can do. There's a lot that we can follow up with. And in that spirit, it's my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Debbie Hommel, who is the immediate past president of the National Certification Council for Activity Professionals. Debbie is a certified therapeutic recreation therapist, or CTRS, and an activity consultant certified by NCCAP. Debbie has worked her entire career in long-term care, medical day care, assisted living, and the support of persons living with intellectual disabilities. She's a national speaker, author, and nonprofit leader specialized in life-enriching activity programming that enhances physical, mental, or cognitive, and psychosocial well-being. Debbie is a master instructor for NCCAP, our professional certification curriculum, and she conducts training, workshops, and seminars on proven approaches to effectively engage persons with dementia to improve their quality of life. And interestingly, I just want to say, you heard the reference to the importance of socialization. Very much what NCCAP and ICAP will be bringing to the ARTDO network is what we refer to as the social model of care, which is distinct. It's not a medical or pharmaceutical. It's a non-pharmacological intervention where you engage the person based on who they are as a person. So Debbie, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for having me. And I'm also honored to be part of these esteemed panel of experts. Whereas my presentation is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be talking more about the person as the individual they are. You know, we're moving away from the brain cells and all the clinical things that happen. And who is that person behind all those things? And I use the term engaging the person as opposed to communicating. And engaging with a person is a little bit different and at kind of a higher level of involvement. And you might be asking yourself, well, what does that mean? I think the engagement relationship involves, you know, not only the words that we speak, but all the nonverbal messages that we send, which we will talk about. It also involves knowing the person and who is that individual behind those brain cells that are slowly dying in our brain. It also involves accepting the person. And I think Dr. Winningham mentioned that a bit, in that we need to go where the person is, and we'll talk about that. And ultimately, you know, we're creating a relationship that is based on trust and support and honoring that person as the person they used to be and also as the person they are now. So that's what I mean about an engagement relationship. It's a little bit deeper than communication, which involves sharing words and feelings, and what makes communication a relationship is the understanding. And that's the challenge we have in working with people living with dementia, is they start to lose the understanding of what those words mean. But that doesn't mean that we can't communicate and we can't engage with the person. And that's what I want to focus on. So let's first talk about that communication is more than words. I'm trying to move these heads. We all are familiar with the statistics related to how much communication is expressed nonverbally, and I think it's probably over 90% are nonverbal means. The facial expressions, the tone of our voice, our gestures, the way we position ourselves near the person. In communicating with a person or engaging with a person living with dementia, we need to be very mindful of these things. I believe that a person living with dementia is very responsive, probably even more responsive to what we're not saying versus the words that we're using. The tone of our voice, whether we are being terse or talking fast or loud, the person living with dementia may not understand the words that we're using, but they understand the tone of the voice. They understand a smile. They understand someone sitting at eye level and making eye contact. They understand that. That's a form of communication that they can still participate in, other than understanding the actual words that we're using. So we need to be mindful of that. And some people have a very reassuring nonverbal way about them, and other people have a more abrasive. And if you have to evaluate that in yourself when you're communicating with people living with dementia, because if you're having communication challenges, you need to ask yourself, well, is it me? You know, I can change, but the person living with dementia cannot. Oops. The next thing is know the person. Now, I know that sounds kind of trite, you know, of course I know the person, especially, you know, it sounds like a lot of us are people concerned either about ourselves or the family members. But in knowing the person, we want to go beyond the simple things. We want to know what they can do. And that's what we do in recreation and activities and life enrichment, is we focus on what the person can do. There's so much emphasis on what the person is losing, the disabilities, the losses, what I can't do, what I can't remember. I believe that we need to focus on the remaining strengths. And it's by identifying those remaining strengths that we can exercise those strengths, as was mentioned in the previous presentations, is identify what they can still do and keep them involved in what they can still do in a very effective and successful way. And that will contribute to the person continue to live the life as they have. We need to know what their preferences are, what their likes and dislikes are. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that we need to look at the person as they used to be as a young person. If many of you were talking about your parents or someone that you live with, you know that person as they are right now. We need to go back to who were they in their teens and their 20s. When we talk about playing preferred music, we need to find out, well, what music did they like when they were 18 years old? Because that might be the music that you would use to interact and engage with the person. We need to know what their hobbies are, and what kind of things did they used to do? Because as it was said by Dr. Winningham, is keeping them involved in familiar tasks is an important diversion to some degree. And it's not only a diversion, but it also contributes to that person's feeling of satisfaction and quality of life, because we all know how we feel when we do something with success and we have accomplished something. So knowing those things is very important, because I can't really engage the person in something that they haven't done before or they're not interested in. So knowing those things will help me engage that person. And I think the most important line here is that each person is unique. When you've met one person living with dementia, you've met one person living with dementia. We can't just assume everybody likes to fold clothes, or everybody likes to hold a baby doll, or everybody likes music from the 70s. Each person is unique, and we need to identify and appreciate that. We also need to accept the person. And I think this too, Dr. Winningham mentioned, the person regresses in time, the theory of retrogenesis. They go back and further back as the disease progresses. And this is probably the hardest thing for family members to accept in a person living with dementia. I've seen occasions where a couple that have been married for 50 years and the person living with dementia doesn't recognize their spouse anymore. This is extremely hard for the spouse to accept. It reminds me of an occasion with my grandmother. I was very close to my grandmother. We would go out to lunch and shop, and she was living with dementia. And we came back from lunch one day and sitting at the couch, and she looked at me and she said, "I feel like I should know you, but I just can't place you." And it was like a knife to my heart. This woman, and the emotional me wanted to say, how could you not know who I am? I'm your favorite granddaughter. But I paused and I thought, and I said, the professional side came out, and I said, "I'm Jay's daughter," and Jay was her son. And she smiled and her face lit up, and she goes, "Oh, Jay, how is Jay?" Now, my dad had died several years earlier, so there was another stab to my heart. And I breathed again, and I said, "Jay sends his love." And she smiled, and she shared stories about my dad. And from that point on, I knew that my grandmother had no idea who I was, but I accepted that. That's where she was. And when I arrived every time for my visit, I always said, "Jay sends his love." And I used to bring flowers or candy, or we'd go out to lunch. And I would always reference that those were from my dad. And I got lots of stories out of her. And the whole point of that is I accepted where she was. I didn't try to correct her. I didn't try to bring her back. It wasn't about me. It was about her. And I think that's an important lesson. And it's a hard thing for family members to get sometimes, because it's really hard to accept the fact that how could you not remember me anymore? But the beauty is they remember a lot of other stuff, and she would bring up people, and I have no idea who she was talking about, as many of the residents in our care communities do. You simply ask them, "Well, tell me about that person," or "Tell me about that occasion." And they'll tell you a whole story. And they may tell you that story over and over and over, but we have to act like we've never heard it before, because to me, that story is a gift, and someday they won't be able to share that story. So the more they are able to share the story, even if it's a routine, familiar story, I have to accept it as the gift that it is. So that's a challenge to us. And I think that's the most humanistic part of this disease, is to accept that person as the individual they are, wherever they are, as some of the other previous speakers have said. The other piece of an engagement relationship is establishing trust, not only establishing, but keeping trust. And the way we trust, or we create trust, is we accept the person where they are, but we also empathize and validate whatever it is they're expressing. I think it was mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about behaviors, but people express themselves through emotions and behaviors. And we may look at some of these emotions as unreasonable or unrealistic or inappropriate. Well, to that person, that behavior is very valid and has to be accepted. Think of yourself. you know, when you're angry about something or you're upset about something and someone comes along and say, oh, don't be silly. That's just, there's no reason to be upset about that. Well, then that usually just makes you more angry and more upset. So to build trust, we need to accept whatever it is they're saying and not minimize it, not discount it, but validate it. We also have to be genuine. You know, when we've listened to that story for the third, fourth, and fifth time, our smiling and our reacting to it has to be genuine. We can't be, oh yeah, I've heard that before. People aren't going to feel comfortable with that. And patience, oh my goodness, we need the patience of a saint. And I think this is even harder for family members sometimes, you know, because if you're living or working with a person you love who is living with dementia, it's hard to see them as this person with dementia versus the mother or the father that raised you. And it's upsetting to you. So we get irritated with them and we lose our patience. But you know how you feel when someone's impatient with you. It makes you upset and you lose your train of thought and you shut down. So in order to build trust, and I think sometimes the best way to understand how a person living with dementia feels is to think how you would feel. How do you feel when you trust someone? Well, you want to share your life with them. You want to interact with them. You want to be with them. So if we can build trust, that helps us in the engagement relationship. And ultimately, we want to create what's called a supportive relationship. I'm a huge component of dignity and autonomy. And sometimes people, when we're caring with people living with dementia, we minimize, or we don't minimize, we don't think they can make good decisions. Well, sometimes they can't make good decisions, but they still like to make decisions. Everybody likes to make decisions. You know, think of yourself again. You don't like being told what to do. So that comes with experiences. Well, how can I present this decision to the person that hopefully they'll make the right one? But people like to have choices. They don't like to be told what to do. We also need to maintain their dignity. We don't treat them like children, even though, you know, it was referenced a person regresses and may go back to childlike behavior. We still don't treat them like a child, and honor that individuality. These are all unique individuals. And as the person lose their sense of identity and sense of self, we can help maintain that and remind them of who they used to be. And there's comfort to them. And I'm a firm believer that even into the end stages of that disease, that person remains. And we as care providers help that person maintain that individuality. I want to talk just briefly a little bit about behavioral expressions. I know it was mentioned earlier as unwanted behaviors, and those behaviors, you know, the behaviors that are demonstrated by individuals living with dementia, at first impression, yeah, they're unwanted, they're inappropriate, they're difficult, the person's a problem. As care providers, we really do need to change our perspective. I'm a firm believer that all behavior is a form of expression, and even if it's unwanted, they're trying to tell me something. If they're yelling, you know, people just don't normally yell. Generally speaking, they're either fearful, they're anxious, they're in discomfort. So whenever I encounter a person who's expressing themselves through some sort of unwanted behavior, the first thing I do is I figure, well, what it is they're trying to say. You know, it may be unperceived in their mind. For example, I don't like spiders, but you can look at some carpets. If you're walking down the hall and there's a carpet that has a design, it looks like a spider to me. If I'm living with dementia and I see that on the floor, I'm going to start screaming and banging on the walls or doing crazy things. And people are going to be looking at me and say, what is she doing? She's just a crazy, demented person. When in actuality, I need to look at what is this person seeing? What are they perceiving? And then how can I resolve that issue? So with any kind of unwanted behavior or behavioral expression, my first bit of advice is try to figure out, is there a cause of any kind? You know, and that cause may be in the person's head. It may not be a real cause, but to that person, it's still a real thing. And that's how they're responding. So this is probably the most challenging part of working with people with dementia, especially in a care community, a structured care community. But I think if we approach the person as the individual they are, we communicate in a way that they can understand, and we treat them with the respect and individuality that they deserve, hopefully we will minimize some of the unwanted behaviors that they're experiencing. And I would like to leave you with one final thought, and it's from Maya Angelou, who is an American poet and author. And this is one of my favorite quotes, and I think it's so relevant to our work with people living with dementia, is that people forget what you say, they forget what you do, but they never forget how you make them feel. And I've experienced this in my work with people living with dementia. You know, I'll walk into an activity space and the residents, they see me and they go, I know you, I know you. They have no idea who my name is, but they know I'm that nice lady who probably has the cookies, and we always have a good time. So that's all I got to say about that.
Thank you so much, Debbie. We've worked together for the past 5 years, and I want to really acknowledge the human touch that you deliver. You know, one of the things that I believe you've pointed out is if we talk about the circle of life, when you think of a newborn, you know, they can't speak. You know, they communicate by yelling and screaming and crying. And we know it has to do with a basic need, like they're hungry, they're tired, they're uncomfortable, they're experiencing pain. So similarly, we see this in older adults who may be living with dementia. And what really needs to be adjusted is our response, our interpretation. And it's all the more difficult to do when it's somebody we know, when I'm dealing with my parent or grandparent who I've known since I was a child and who's always occurred to me as an adult. So when they behave this way or don't remember these things, it is frustrating. And the one word that you emphasized, Debbie, was patience, patience, patience. So that concludes our expert panel. I really want to extend a sincere appreciation to Dr. Winningham, Dr. Bendheim, and Debbie, particularly both of our doctors are on the West Coast of the US, which is 3 hours, even 3 hours earlier. So they've been up since before dawn. And we've got such a rich complement of expertise, the science, the medicine, the behavior, and the human interaction. You know, these are all things that we will continue to explore together. And right now, we'd like to take a moment and spend some time with questions. I've received a couple of questions that I'd like to start with, but then I'd actually like to see some hands and we could open it up to the floor. So let me ask a couple of questions for our speakers. Dr. Winningham, one of the questions that I received is, can you help explain the best way to determine or distinguish between dementia and delirium?
I'd be happy to address that. And it's a good question because it can immediately affect somebody's quality of life. I think that, you know, and Dr. Bendheim might have more to say about this as well, but it's the course of how quickly it comes on. You know, dementia usually takes many years to develop. It's a very slow progression, Alzheimer's being probably the slowest. Delirium comes on fairly quickly. You know, if you think about a urinary tract infection, which is probably one of the most common, you're going to see this develop in a period of a week or two. And the person isn't going to look and act like they did 2 or 3 weeks ago. And when that happens, then, you know, in a care setting, you know, geriatric specialists say, well, let's do a test. You know, it's a very simple test to see if somebody has a urinary tract infection. We could look for other things as well that, you know, maybe there's been a change in medication. One thing we'll see is we give people a drug to control tremors for Parkinson's disease, for example, that affects that acetylcholine system that I was explaining, and somebody will look like they have delirium fairly quickly. So it really is how quick it comes on. With that said, you also need to be mindful that it could be a stroke. Someone could have had a fairly major stroke that could have also done that, but you're likely to see some other effects there as well. And then we're just trying to begin to rule out, is it dehydration? Is it an infection? Is it something like that? Because it's important to point out, unfortunately, I know of cases firsthand where they said, well, they have dementia. They didn't have dementia, they had delirium. And we saw that on the autopsy, that there was, some sort of infection. So we need to try to figure that out if it's come on fairly quickly.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. The next question that I received, I'd like to pose to Dr. Bendheim, and it has to do with nutrition and activity. Could you suggest, from your experience, one or two specific food items and activities or exercises that you believe are most helpful?
Sure. I'm very reluctant to suggest a single food. For those of you who are familiar with the American nutritional scene, blueberries are touted as the great brain boosting berry. Well, in fact, that is because the Michigan Blueberry Growers Association hired some scientists to measure the antioxidant levels, and they did, and they're high, but they're high in raspberries and in grapes, and you name the berry. So on the nutritional side, I think it's the American Heart Association says, eat the rainbow, eat a variety of fruits and vegetables of different colors. You can't go wrong. And the other piece I'll say about nutrition, the less processed the food is, the healthier it is. So in America, I can't speak in other countries, but our supermarkets are organized. So shop the perimeter. The perimeter is where you'll find the fresh fruits and vegetables. If you go down the center aisles, you find all these processed foods that are distinctly less healthy, high in fat, high in salt, and high in sugar. So as far as exercise, as Dr. Winningham said, and as Ms. Hommel iterated it, and I'll say, it's absolutely clear now that if you walk at a modest pace, 30 minutes, 5 times a week, so that's a total of 150 minutes, 2.5 hours, you not only protect your heart, your lungs, your bones, you're going to feel better, and you're going to protect this most valuable organ. So every 5 years, the US government publishes physical activity guidelines for Americans. For the first time in the 2018 edition, they had a whole chapter devoted to cognitive health. If you do physical exercise, you protect your brain. Now, if you can't walk and you have access to a swimming pool, move in a swimming pool. Any movement that modestly increases your respiratory rate, your heart rate, is going to provide real benefits. And almost without exception, people that move feel better. They're happier. And the other thing, when you start exercising, you start thinking about the fuel you put in your body generally. And so people that exercise, they talk with others and they start modifying their diet. And it's a stress reliever. It helps you sleep better. Everything builds on it.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that feedback. We are at the time at which we intend to end. It's 9:30. For those of you that need to leave, we understand and we thank you for your time and attention. For those that can remain, I'd still like to open it up to some questions from the floor. So if there's a way to indicate, raise your hand or jump in and we'll try to answer your question, because we've got several pages of faces and names on our Zoom broadcast. So
yeah, Peter, I'm on my second cup of coffee here. What time is it now? 6:30 in Phoenix, Arizona in the morning. And I know Rob is on the same time zone. It's now light. When we started this, it was not light here in Arizona.
Right. Thank you. So are there questions people have, please?
Yeah, like I tell the first year students, this is a huge topic. And again, my hat goes off to Rob for talking about delirium. That's a huge subject as well. So I tell the students, no question is inappropriate. So don't hold back. We're here to try and help each of you become more familiar with this very important topic.
Well, I've received another question here, and it's asking if it's possible to identify the top several indicators. In other words, what should I be looking for as a red flag or an indicator of cognitive decline or dementia? Is there something that should say, oh, they're asking that question over and over? Is it really dementia? Is it delirium? Is it a slower recall? Can our speakers address that?
I'll try to go first on that. It's a really good question, actually, because people get confused. We talk about memory, and in the entire time we've talked, we haven't talked about the difference between making a new memory of something that recently happened, like I ate breakfast this morning or not, versus recalling an old memory from maybe decades ago. We generally do not see deficits, particularly at the early to mid stage of dementia, remembering things that happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. We see deficits remembering things that happened 20, 40 minutes ago. And that's kind of what to look at, and that's where we do see, I think, we see these problems where people repeat a story that they had told 5 minutes ago. That is a little more concerning because they didn't have the ability to remember that they told that story 5 minutes ago. But but I'm not concerned if they told the story that they told me 10 years ago. That would not be as concerning. So really looking at their ability to make new memories, that largely is explained by executive functioning, their ability to pay attention in the moment, because that attention allows us to lay down new memories. But we see damage to the hippocampus and other regions in terms of making those new memories, and it can be more challenging. So yeah, it's the ability to make a new memory, which is something that I would be paying attention to.
Yeah, I think Rob is 100% correct. The only thing I'd add, if there's a change, if you notice a change in a loved one, friend's ability to carry out their daily functions, including memory function, get them to a qualified evaluation, whether it's initially by a psychologist, such as Dr. Winningham and his colleagues, or a physician, because there are absolutely treatable causes of dementia, reversible causes, certain vitamin deficiencies, chronic blood clots on top of the brain, so-called subdural hematomas. So everybody who's experiencing a change in executive cognitive function needs a thorough evaluation. And I'll just add one other thing. Delirium, as Dr. Winningham absolutely said correctly, is usually a very short-term acute development, as opposed to dementia, which develops over months and years. And delirium is virtually 100% treatable and reversible. So that is an absolute red flag. If a sudden change in behavior, cognitive function, delirium needs to be thoroughly evaluated. And as Dr. Winningham again correctly said, often it's even an asymptomatic urinary tract infection or a low-grade pneumonia in an elderly person. And people with dementia are not immune from delirium. We often see somebody who has, in a care facility because of dementia, get an acute change for the worse. That's delirium superimposed on dementia.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you both, Rob and Paul. I see a raised hand from Haru in Korea. Could you please ask your question?
Yes, my English is poor. I'm sorry. But first I said my mom has got dementia after car accident. So today I have a little question. Usually my mom, the memory before the accident is intact, but she can't remember happening recently. small things, daily small things, routine. She forgot it. So what should I do for her? So I don't want to correct what she says something wrong. Just I say it again and again as if it was just first time. So, oh, is it true? Is it right action for her? It's my question.
Right.
But today, yes, uh, I, uh, I I know. Oh, that is the right action. Is it right?
Yes, thank you for your question. And I think it was explained by our medical folks. So I'm going to put that in the behavioral response question and ask Debbie to affirm that what Haru is saying is correct, to act as if it's the first time each time.
Yeah, I mean, if it's her short-term memory that she's losing, it's
Yeah.
as the doctors explained, it's the process of keeping a current memory is lost.
Yes.
So it is what it is. And, you know, getting impatient or whatever, it's very, very difficult. I agree. You're going to have a tough time, but in a patient way, just repeat it. I don't know if she would accept written cues. I mean, if there are certain things she's asking about, can you write it down, or can you turn it into kind of a routine? Because I forget who said, but someone said you could learn procedural things. It might be possible for her to relearn some familiar tasks, you know, with patience and consistency. So that's something you're going to have to evaluate is, are these things she's asking about things that I can turn into a procedure or a series of tasks and just be consistent about introducing? But, you know, she's your mom, love her, and be patient. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
Yeah, thank you.
And take breaks. You need to take care of yourself, because sometimes you need to walk away. You know, I know in the care community, some of the residents sometimes are trying, and we just need to walk away, breathe, and go back in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
I would ask Rob, what's the role of neurocognitive rehabilitation? Haru's mother suffered a traumatic brain injury, it sounds like. Am I right, Haru?
Yeah, car accident.
Car accident, yeah. So I would think she's a candidate for evaluation and then neurocognitive rehabilitation.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. If it's a traumatic brain injury, we often can rehabilitate it. And the more cognitive reserve they have, the better the outcomes are likely to be there. And we would need to look at where the deficits are. That's where the testing is nice. If we had a baseline neuropsych test of your mom before the injury, then we could see exactly where the deficits are, and we can target those deficits. But the most common part of the brain to injure in a motor vehicle accident is the frontal lobe. And so we're going to see benefits from attention training, inhibition training, and we can measure it. We can see, are they actually getting better? And increasingly, when we first started doing this work, it was all paper and pencil, but there are a number of good apps available that can target attention training, executive functioning. You can kind of look at that improvement. So if it really is deficit due to a traumatic brain injury, not a neurodegenerative disease, then there might be some improvement.
All right, great. Thank you for that response. I see the hand of Yong Hong Ing. You have a question? We can't hear you.
You hear me clearly?
We can hear you now.
Thank you very much for this webinar. So I have two questions to ask. The first one, maybe I'm wondering about the sleep time upside down, because like some people are working at night and have to just only rest at the day. How about that? Is it considered as a very bad sleeping quality or sleeping habits? Will it affect the brain activity something? And because of that, although the people still sleep at maybe 8 hours, will it affect the brain? Maybe develop dementia in a later time? This is my first question. And about the second question is, COVID-19 affect the world like so much, and I am wondering. I see many research talk about, okay, the COVID-19 will affect our brain activity. Will it be a potential risk factor for us to develop the dementia?
Right, right. Excellent questions. Thank you. And I'm going to turn that over to our speakers, but let me try to summarize it. The first question, I understand, relates to sleep. And there were two parts to that question. One is whether sleeping during the day or sleeping during the night are different, because some people work all night and have to sleep during the day. And then the second is there a recommended target of hours of sleep, the quantity and quality distinction, I believe. And then the other relates to the impact of COVID-19 on dementia. So Rob or Paul, do you want to start with that? Rob?
Yeah, I would be happy to. I'm actually going to share my screen real quick. This is from one of my books. This was on sleep and memory. These are the possible negative consequences associated with insomnia or poor sleep. And as you can see here, increased mortality of risk, quality of life, obesity, diabetes, depression, anxiety. There are a lot of problems associated with poor sleep. And many of these, including obesity, diabetes, stress, depression, are risk factors for dementia. So absolutely, there's a connection between sleep quality, sleep quantity, and your chance of developing dementia. The question about working odd hours. Unfortunately, people who work, we say graveyard hours or swing shift, they are at increased risk for gastrointestinal problems, depression, social problems, and other things. So you really need to take care of yourself if you are sleeping off cycle, and that's important. Quantity and quality of sleep, there is variability between what people need. And so, it's hard to give a number, but, if you want a number, I would say, approaching 7 hours a day for older adults. We do need less sleep as we get older. The one thing that I think one of the most important things, insomnia is high. 1/3 of older adults will have diagnosable insomnia at some point. And as you saw, that can lead to a lot of problems. We've changed our recommendations on sleep that it is actually okay to take a nap. People who take naps actually will sleep on average a little less at night, but on average they get more sleep in a 24-hour period. And so that can be beneficial. I don't know, it looks like Dr. Bendheim might have.
No, again, Rob has done a great job in covering a very complicated subject in a encapsulated way. I would ask patients, most mornings when you awake, you feel refreshed, ready to go. And if they say yes, then I move on. If they say no, then it's time for a deeper dive into what their sleep is like, what the sleep issues are, and if needed, referral to a sleep center where they can be evaluated with an actual somnogram. They're monitored while they're sleeping. It's a big risk factor for a whole host of things, including cognitive impairment and dementia. Now, we've only recognized that in the last 10, 15 years. And in this country, because of our obesity issue, obstructive sleep apnea is probably by far and away the most prevalent sleep problem among middle-aged and older adults. And that can be treated.
Excellent. All right, thank you. I see two more hands and we'll get to these questions. So I see Asad Abdullah, your hand is up. Could you please ask your question?
Well, I would like to be really grateful for you guys' invitation and for having us here on this very and sorry also for my bad English since it's my second language as well. So my question is, from the causes of dementia, let's not talk about the medical side of dementia. Let's maybe talk about the psychological side of dementia, or how is these things will affect youth in the future, because I see some things such as bad habits, bad habits when it comes to food and everything. How will this, I see this happen a lot with the youth nowadays. So as this thing happening a lot to youth, how will this affect this dementia to be more affecting of the next generation in the future?
Excellent question. And I'm going to ask our experts to answer that, because that is a shocking observation that we are experiencing, particularly in the more affluent world, where the number of young people with these behavior-associated disorders like diabetes, obesity, lower inactivity, what are going to be the impacts for their cognitive health as they age with these conditions that normally didn't occur until later in life, but now are showing up and manifesting in youth at much younger ages. Please. Robert.
Yeah, I'd be happy to go. It's going to depend. I think there are some concerning trends, especially if we look at internationally. We are seeing increased rates of obesity in some parts of the world, and the increased obesity is going to be associated with increased diabetes, and both of those are going to have independent, contributing factors to dementia. More fatty meats could also be problematic, increased cardiovascular risk. I'm probably the most concerned about two things, though. The physical activity levels, as we change our lifestyle, that's going to have a significant impact. But I'm from a cognitive standpoint, I'm actually a little more concerned about attention deficit disorder and the ability to have sustained attention. There have been changes just in the time that I've been a professor for about 25 years. It is a lot harder to get a sustained attention out of students to be learning for an hour and a half or 2 hours straight. And to the point where best practice is, if we record a video for an online, supplemental online course or something, that we shouldn't talk for more than 15 minutes. And that lack of sustained attention, I see this in my own children, where I tell them, control your mind. You should not be looking at your phone while you're watching TV, while your mom and dad are talking to you. You need to control your mind and focus. So I'm concerned if people who have attention deficit disorder because of lifestyle choices, they are probably going to be at increased risk for dementia later, because they're going to have less of those resources to lose in older adulthood.
Paul?
No, I think, none of us has a crystal ball, but there are clearly activities, societal activities, that would prompt those of us in the field, Dr. Winningham, myself, Debbie, to be concerned. I get back to, again, repeating what Rob just said, the lack of physical activity. That's a great distressor. So when you have decreased stress, you're better able to concentrate. And there's literature demonstrating that if you go for a 15-minute walk before an important meeting or before an exam, you're going to do better. So I would emphasize these time-proven interventions, physical activity and healthy eating, as a base for worldwide improvement in overall health.
Right. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much. All right. So being cognitive of time, we're going to take one more question I see from my friend and colleague in Spain, Luis Aranda. Luis, please ask your question.
Hi, Peter. How are you? And thank you, everybody here in Spain. Well, more than and a question, it would be like an opinion after having heard all these interesting data and analysis, and especially when I was hearing to Debbie and she was talking about the social training. Spain has been known as a country which is very sociable and like the Southern Europe, and it's been great in order to deal with dementia and old people. But we are experiencing at the moment, as you said, also, it's just that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just giving you our views from here. Obesity is increasing, elderly are living on their own, and we are finding that there is an important need, huge need for training of adults that are taking care of our elderly at home. Most of the time they come from Latin countries trying to get a better living, and they don't have the training. They're taking care of. So at the moment we are working with the European Union, trying to figure out how we could train these people, because they're taking care of more than 50% of our elderly at home. So I thank you for what you're doing and the training that also Dr. Bendheim was saying about brain training or brain savers and all these activities, because they're very needed in Europe too.
Right.
So thank you very much.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you, Luis. And it's good to hear the perspective from the European continent. But that was really very much a good support and emphasis on what this webinar, the first initiative that we're having as part of the international activities of NCCAP, together with ARTDO US and this global ARTDO International family. So really the opportunity is for us to work with the expertise of these speakers, our organization, the training, the education, the knowledge, the skills, the competencies necessary to care for our aging population, and particularly those that may be suffering cognitive decline. And the emphasis there that I heard clearly is the importance of socialization, not that there's a medical intervention or a drug that's a simple fix, but the importance of the relationship that needs to be maintained and supported and nurtured as a critical element of quality of life. So on that note, let me say thank you to all of you. Let me ask and invite Dr. Atif to please give a final thanks to our participants and send us off with a charge to do better.
Really, thank you very much. Highly appreciate this wealthy webinar. A special thanks to you and to your distinguished expert speakers who enrich our knowledge and information about dementia from all dimensions. Also, I would like to emphasize that we in the network of the ARTDO International and our counterpart ARTDO, we will be more than happy to open also ways and links for certifications for our members through the good relation between ARTDO International and ARTDO US, and also NCCAP and ICAP. Thank you very much. And before we end, could you please open your camera in order to take a group photo? And inshallah, this will not be the first and last webinar. There will be continuous training, continuous webinars utilizing this expert and this channel, which is already open now. Thank you very much. Please open your cameras. President Rasheed or Rita, if you had, thank you.
President Rasheed, can you unmute yourself to just give a statement? Well, thank you so much to everybody, especially the speakers. It has been overwhelmingly rich, and I think it has given a practical side to our lives. And I'm sure every one of us are having lots of career way with those messages, complex dimensions, complex, medical areas have been brought to very simple, understanding forum. So thank you very much on my personal behalf and on behalf of ARTDO. I think I thank you all, Peter, and everybody else, especially the speakers and Dr. Atif and Rita. Thank you very much. Hopefully we'll see you again more often than in the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for all the seniors who are here with us. Chairman Emeritus, Dr. Thomas Chi, Dr. Lee, President Lesbakid, all the brothers and sisters who are with us here. Thank you very much, colleagues from all the regions.
And as we are going back to our Saturday, we'll also like to welcome our newest ARTDO member, Ms. Tana Lachmi, who is next to me. We are in Port Dickson right now. And also please say welcome to Jitesh, Bangalore. You see, we are having a small mini ARTDO reunion in Port Dickson, Malaysia. We're attending together. So that is the power of the ARTDO network, right? And as we have learned today, we have so many brain visuals in our mind now, and we know that we have to move. Short music from Malaysia for you to move your hands and your body as you exit this room. What do you think? Are you willing to participate?
Let's go for it.
All right.
Yeah.
So here we are. You have to do 30 minutes. 5 times a week. Thank you, the doctors, Dr. Bendheim, Debbie, Peter Illig, Dr. Winningham. We have to immediately put all the insights and the lessons into action.
Lina.
Kak Pun Maka. Selamat malam. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. See you soon.